My name is Ella, and at 17 years old, I am my parents' only child. They have always shown me nothing but love and affection. As I grew up, I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. But that idea changed after an incident in 8th grade. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, a woman with a surprisingly striking appearance was waiting for me at the door. With a loud shout, she caught my attention. "You must be Ella, right?" I froze, unable to respond immediately. In my first year of elementary school, a teacher had taught us 3 basic rules to keep us safe: don't go, don't get in, scream and run. Those words remained etched in my memory as my first lesson in self-protection. "Oh, I scared you. Sorry. It's okay. I'm a friend of your dad's," the woman said cheerfully. She had an extravagant look, very blonde hair, huge sunglasses, and a smile that seemed mocking. Despite her reassuring words, something about her attitude didn't give me confidence. I was skeptical. I had seen enough dramas on TV to know that those who insist they are harmless often are not. "I know it's you, Ella," she said as she rummaged through her extravagantly decorated bag. She pulled out a smartphone with a case as flashy as her bag. Her long, adorned nails seemed impractical for everyday tasks. She turned the phone towards me, showing me a photo. It was me with my parents at my first communion. The same photo that I used as wallpaper on my own phone. How did she have it? Surprised and uncomfortable, I remained silent while the woman continued talking. "Why do I have this is not strange at all. Your dad gave it to me." She laughed in a troubled manner before introducing herself as John, and then she suddenly left. But not before leaving me a strange message. "Tell your mom to talk to your dad." When I got home, I saw my mom's warm and welcoming face, and I decided to keep silent. On the surface, everything continued as usual. My dad was still the kind and dedicated family man he always was, pursuing his dream of becoming a fashion designer. But something had changed in me. A cold, heavy knot settled in my heart, a silent witness to unresolved tension. I went from elementary school to high school, and my parents acted as if nothing had happened, even posing with me for photos at school events. To others, we were a perfectly normal family. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over time, that unease only grew. Shortly after starting high school, my mom became seriously ill. The disease threatened to shorten her life. "It's no lie, I won't be here for much longer," she told me with a slight smile. Despite everything, I kept my worries to myself, trying not to think about that incident with the woman who introduced herself as John. I hoped it had just been a misunderstanding or a cruel joke. But the doubt and secrecy weighed heavily on me and shaped my young life in ways I never imagined. One day, my mom spoke to me seriously. "Ella, there is something important I need to discuss with you." She paused for a moment, and with a worried look, continued, "I have a feeling that when I'm no longer here, things could get difficult for you." She paused, took my hand, and added, "I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to prepare you. It's important that you can live independently." My mom's words were etched in my mind. She wanted to make sure I was ready to face the world alone. Although I couldn't imagine a life without her, it seemed that my mom didn't imagine a future in which I lived with my dad or just the two of us. Maybe she sensed something that I had always suspected but didn't dare ask her directly. It seemed she thought I already knew, but preferred not to talk about it explicitly. "When the time comes, you may face challenges that you don't like. But I hope you understand that everything I do is for your own good," she told me. I simply replied, "Yes, I understand, Mom." She seemed pleased with my answer, gave me a big hug, and thanked me. After that, we didn't talk much more about the subject. We continued living as if everything were normal, just the 4 of us. The only change was that Mom began to weaken little by little. She frequently went to the hospital until one day she could no longer return home. During that time, Dad stayed by her side constantly. He would quickly leave work to visit her, arriving home early to cook and manage the house, making sure everything was in order. To anyone who saw us from the outside, Dad seemed like the perfect husband and father. However, something about his behavior seemed forced. I made soup. "How does it taste?" he would ask me. "It's delicious," I would respond. Although I always added, "You are a great cook. But I miss Mom's food. I hope she can cook for us again soon." We played our roles within the family, maintaining a facade. I felt that both my mom and I knew that it was all just an act. But we kept trying to maintain peace in her last days. That's how we spent that time. Simply letting the days pass. Pretending everything was fine. Years later, when I was in my 3rd year of high school, my mom passed away. Losing his wife was deeply heartbreaking for my dad. A pain that only those who have experienced it can understand. During the wake and funeral, he played the role of grieving husband impeccably. His tears seemed to reflect mine, but there was something empty in his gaze. The attendees expressed their condolences, crying for the grieving husband and daughter. After the services, many people advised me to be strong for my dad. But Mom and I had made a promise. I had to forge my own path. As expected, my dad's presence at home began to decrease. Dad is busy with work, I would say, justifying his absence. You are old enough to take care of yourself, he told me, leaving me to face most days on my own. It was difficult. Much more so than I imagined. I had hoped that after Mom's death, Dad would show more concern for me. But that didn't happen. At 15, caught between being an adult and still being a child, I began to gradually adapt to loneliness. Then, a month after Mom's memorial service, something I didn't expect happened. It was a quiet Saturday at home when suddenly the noise outside caught my attention. First we'll clear out all the unnecessary items. Then we'll organize the rest, my dad was saying, directing a group of workers. Confused, I approached and asked, "What is happening? Why are they moving Mom's things?" To my surprise and dismay, the workers began to remove my mom's belongings. No, don't do it," I protested, blocking the entrance. "They're just doing their job," my dad replied in an indifferent tone. "Mom is no longer here to use them, so I'm going to move them." He seemed to enjoy the mess that this was causing. Desperate, I resisted, throwing myself in the doorway to prevent them from taking her things. "What do you plan to do with all of this?" I demanded to know. "What can be sold will be sold, the rest will be discarded," my dad said coldly as he watched the scene without emotion. It seemed as if he were determined to take something very precious. Among the things they were removing was my mother's bridal trousseau, an elaborate collection lovingly made by my maternal grandparents, who were wealthy and very detailed. This trousseau was not only economically valuable but also had deep sentimental value. At that moment, the movers were trying to take the trousseau, following my dad's orders. I protested and explained that the trousseau had been handmade by my grandmother for my mom's wedding. It was part of our family heritage. While I was trying to explain, an intrigued voice was heard behind me. John walked past me to inspect the trousseau, commented on its vintage quality, and declared that she would use it. Despite my request, the movers continued until John instructed them to stop. My dad finally ordered the items to be returned. Confused and curious about that woman's authority, I questioned my dad, who, with a smile, introduced John as his new wife and therefore my new stepmother. I was bewildered and refused to accept her. My dad, smiling coldly, threatened me, "If you can't accept her, you'd better leave." "I'm just a child, I can't live alone," I responded, trying to reason with him. John pretended to be offended and demanded an apology to stay in the house. But I flatly refused to live with her. Faced with my firm stance, my dad surprisingly suggested, "If you can't accept her, then leave." Accepting his challenge calmly, I looked directly at him and replied, "Okay." This surprised both him and John. Without saying more, I went to my room to pack. There wasn't much left since I had moved my most important belongings elsewhere in advance. I gathered the last of what remained, and as I left, I said goodbye to them both with a clear declaration. From now on, we are strangers. I left the house and took a taxi to my grandparents' house in the suburbs. Upon arriving, they greeted me warmly. Although they were disappointed by my dad's deceit, I felt relieved to be with them. Reflecting on the past, I appreciated even more everything my mom had done for me. She had prepared me to be independent, teaching me household skills and how to cook from an early age. Thanks to that, despite her death and my dad's absence, I managed quite well. A month after I left, my dad tried to contact me repeatedly, but I ignored his calls. I knew that his attempts to contact me were probably selfish. This new chapter of my life although bittersweet, was a testament to my mom's love and foresight. I turned off my phone and left it in my room before going to school. Even after returning home, I didn't check it immediately. It wasn't until later that night, after taking a relaxing bath and just before going to bed, that I decided to check it. To my surprise, I found about 100 missed calls. My phone had been ringing non-stop. "Hello, Ella. Why didn't you answer before? Do you have any idea how many times I called?" His tone was incredibly rude and direct. I decided not to respond. The voice continued. "Hello, Ella. Can you hear me? Why are you silent?" I remained silent. Then, as if he understood something, the tone of the voice softened. "Ella, it's your dad. You haven't forgotten my voice, have you?" I wish I could forget it, I thought to myself. But I remained silent. "Ella, help me. I'm in trouble. You wouldn't turn your back on me, would you?" His pleading tone was repulsive to me. Then, calmly, I replied, "I don't have a father." There was a moment of silence before he insisted. "It's me, your dad. Please help me. Ella, think of your family." I firmly replied, "You have the wrong number. Check well before dialing." I hung up and turned off my phone. I was not going to allow the man who was once my father to disturb my peace again. The next day, when I stopped answering, my dad and his partner, John, appeared uninvited at my grandparents' house. They were aggressive and demanding. "Let us see Ella. Surely they have poisoned her against us. Send her home immediately." But what they didn't know was that before she died, my mom had transferred ownership of all her assets to my name, including our family home, the house that was originally a gift from my grandparents to my mom when she got married. Now it legally belonged to me. My mom, aware of her terminal illness, had acted quickly, paying all necessary taxes and making sure the paperwork was legal. However, she never informed my dad, who still believed he owned the property. My dad was in a panic. I consulted with my guardian, who is also my lawyer, and we decided to issue an eviction notice. The notice made it clear that he had 1 month to vacate the house or face legal action. It also stated that all the household belongings that I had already documented belonged to me and that any damage would be covered by compensation. Approximately 10 days later, my dad responded with a will supposedly from my mom, stating that all of her assets had been left to him. However, that will was outdated since he wrote it shortly after her diagnosis. My mom, for her part, had prepared a more recent will, dated the day before her death, in which she left everything to me and entrusted me to the care of my grandparents, ensuring that my dad would not have custody. We responded to his claims by explaining that the new will invalidated the previous one. Despite his attempts to contest it, it was clear that my mom's last wishes were for me and that he had no right to anything. Days after our firm response, a lawyer representing my dad approached, saying there had been a misunderstanding and requesting a meeting. But by that time, it was too late for any reconciliation. What happened was that my dad had hidden the fact that he had a sister, John. Our lawyer said that I had quietly moved to my grandparents' house and that I was no longer in contact with him. During his visit to my grandparents, he alleged that they had called the police and denied him visitation, saying they feared I was being held against my will. My dad desperately pleaded, saying that I was still a minor and could not understand my decision to be adopted by my grandparents without his permission. He suspected that my grandparents had deceived me and that I had believed their lies. "She is my beloved daughter, the only one my wife left me. Please, help me get her back," he implored. As I watched my dad cry and express his concerns, it was a challenge for the lawyer, who commented on the confusion I must be feeling after losing my mom. He also noted that my dad had lost his beloved and had not been there for me as he should have been, which could be the reason for his emotional state. I couldn't help but wonder about his performance, considering his past aspirations of becoming a fashion designer. I remembered a moment at the deathbed of my mom when she asked my dad to take care of me, a scene he solemnly accepted in the hands of my grandparents. Initially, I was skeptical of my dad and was moved to see him so emotional. But I felt distant when I did not see any genuine warmth in that gesture. During a meeting with the lawyer, I presented a recording of the day the movers arrived at our house. That recording showed my dad's true behavior. His facade of concern for my mom and me crumbled when the lawyer heard it. It was clear that my dad had been acting all the time. The lawyer then informed me that he had rejected my dad's request and had accused him of breach of contract for lying about the circumstances surrounding my situation. The truth came to light about my mom's past. When she was a teenager, she had fallen in love with my dad, who was then a fashion designer in a small theater group. Despite the age difference and his unstable career, they eventually married under the condition of my grandparents that my mom would not lose her last name, since she was the only daughter of an important business magnate. After marrying my dad, my mom stopped acting and joined a company that had ties to my grandfather's business. Although this didn't help her earn my grandfather's trust, his true colors began to show over time. I might have continued thinking he was a good father if I hadn't discovered his affair with John, a nightclub worker who mistakenly believed she could replace my mom. The reality was harsh. My mom had received a letter sent by my grandparents after her death, revealing their suspicions about my dad. Although he had been a person she adored, her intuition led her to discover that he was unfaithful and had several lovers. Although it was said that he was only with her for her money, she clung to the hope of a happy family life after my birth. But when I knew the truth, I realized that the man I thought was a loving father was actually just a fashion designer hiding his true motives and infidelities behind a facade of family devotion. Things reached a point where they had nothing left to lose. My dad's resignation was evident. I was already ready to take legal action, and they knew perfectly well what my position was. The day I met John as a child was the turning point. She tried to force my mom to leave, making herself noticeable in a way that could be interpreted as intentional interference with custody. From a legal point of view, it is possible to seek compensation from a mistress who tries to separate a parent from their young child. John denied having such intentions, but a private investigator that I hired managed to record the incident. She was begging for mercy, asking me not to take legal action, but my decision was already made. The lawsuit that resulted from that publicly exposed John's misconduct, which led to her being fired from the club where she had already caused several problems. This club, known for its prestige, greatly valued its reputation and could not risk associating with someone like John. When faced with that decision, they asked her to resign. John even threatened to sue me for defamation, but I ignored her threats and was not worried about the possibility of a lawsuit. Eventually, she did not file the lawsuit and left the club, which greatly limited her future job opportunities in important places. Although the lawsuit is still ongoing, winning will not bring a great financial gain, but what I want is to vindicate myself. I refuse to let them win so easily. My determination is firm. Meanwhile, my dad's professional life collapsed. He had secured his position in the company through nepotism, taking advantage of my grandfather's influence and his relationship with him. Although he tried to remain shielded from criticism, the scandal of being kicked out of his house by his daughter and the exposure of his relationship with John showed his true incompetence, which had previously been hidden under a facade of ability. It was evident that his only real talent was pretending. His true lack of skills came to light, dispelling any illusion that he was capable. His reputation was forever tarnished, and that earned him the contempt of his colleagues and clients. Despite his attempts to remain discreet, the work environment became too hostile, and he had no choice but to resign. Now he lives in a modest apartment, and John sometimes asks for help, but our relationship has been reduced to a simple friendship marked by contempt. I have no intention of helping him. In another incident, John damaged my mother's bridal trousseau, and when demanding compensation, they probably used my father's severance pay or savings, perhaps even some debt. However, their financial situation is no longer my problem. I have cut off all contact with him and made it clear that his decisions are solely his responsibility. I am now legally adopted by my grandfather, but not much has changed. Just our legal relationship. As I prepare to study abroad during high school, I reflect on my mother's foresight in ensuring that I would not face language barriers, preparing me to be strong no matter where life takes me. I am ready to embrace a future that fulfills and exceeds my mother's expectations. I am excited to learn from new experiences abroad and find someone who truly loves me in some way. This is the lesson that my mother's story has taught me. As I say this, the mother in the photo seems to smile timidly.